What caused Justin Trudeau's sudden dip in popularity? Commonly accepted theories tell us that it was because he had been in politics too long, or that he got too caught up in identity politics. I think there's a classical psychological explanation with evolutionary psychology. I'm Jen Whitfield. I'm your host here at The Whistle. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing basic psychological theory using evolutionary theory to explain why we will suddenly like one politician and then suddenly we won't, and will like someone that we didn't like a year ago or a week ago. So what does evolutionary theory say about why we choose certain leaders over others? So let's take this theory and apply it to an actual situation so that it makes sense. So the theory goes that during times of struggle, we will choose different leaders. That the cooperative leaders that we would normally like under normal circumstances, when everything is good, suddenly we don't like them. It's actually what we call a heuristic will kick in. So they're these, think of them as cycles. They will kick in, and suddenly we like different people. We will choose a different leader. And this goes back to the days of when we were hunter-gatherers. The moment that we sense a struggle, which will almost always come in the form of a fear surrounding our resources, a lack of resources, which will usually lead to conflicts. And so as soon as we sense these things, these cycles kick in, and suddenly we will choose a different leader. So the theory goes like this. Under normal circumstances, we prefer cooperative leaders. But then as soon as we detect something, like there's a struggle coming, suddenly we want the tough guy. And if you apply this to Justin Trudeau, everything was good, the economy was fine, and that's when he rose to popularity. And he's a highly cooperative leader. And it's a personality trait. And then once there was a shift in the economy, which is where we now look to for resources. We don't look at the physical resources, we look at the economy, but it's coming from our fear of a lack of resources. So we look at him and we fear that he's going to be too soft. We like cooperative leaders because they can negotiate and they won't cause any trouble. But if we sense an impending conflict, which will always happen over resources, these heuristics kick in because they are things our ancestors knew. And they will, these cycles kick in. So it's a problem. So the lack of resources and the upcoming conflict is a problem. And our solution is this really simple one of let's choose a tough guy for a leader. And I think that's what happened here to Trudeau. I think that he didn't change. It was the external circumstances that changed. And the people who vote for him, they didn't change either. It was all an outside thing came in, and it signaled this lack of resources suddenly. Sorry, this fly is taking a starring role here. I think this is the best explanation that we have for why he was doing well, or at least okay, and then he suddenly dipped. It was because the economy was creating problems. We were experiencing rapid inflation. People couldn't afford their homes. Groceries went up in price. And that was enough to signal this resource scarce. And then that means we don't want this cooperative leader. Our fear with a cooperative leader is that he'll share stuff when we need him not to in order to survive. This comes from our hunter-gatherer days when we couldn't store food or produce food or trade food. We're a much more advanced civilization now, so we don't have to rely on these heuristics, but it will kick in and it will cause us to want the tough guy. The tough guy leader will come in. This is why dictators can rise to power during times of economic trouble or after an economic problem. And I think that explains why he suddenly They didn't like him, and suddenly the popularity started shifting to Pierre Poilievre, who signals more of that tough guy style of leadership that under normal circumstances just isn't popular. Now the theory gets very interesting because it's all about the individual psychological traits. People who have high levels of aggression, they're aware of their aggression, but they also know people won't like that. So instead of trying to change and grow, what they do is they sit back and wait. And they know there's going to come a time when the public will change their mind and they'll say, we need you. And so they sit and wait. They sit and wait for conflict. They sit and wait for resources to become scarce. And suddenly the public opinion will shift away from a cooperative leader toward someone with higher levels of aggression, the tough guy. Because we want someone who's going to withhold resources and not share. And this is just a really basic heuristic. What does this mean for Pierre Poilievre? His party is asking him to pivot. They're asking him to pivot to a softer approach because Mark Carney has come in and he signals that he's very good with resources. It's not necessarily that he's signaling aggression. It's that someone like Mark Carney can demonstrate that he's good with resources. This is a fairly dominant personality, and that's enough for us in a time of trouble that we will put our trust in someone like him. So someone like Pierre Poilievre, because when we're talking about what we call aggression or dominance, there's different ways that it manifests. It can come from being good with resources. It can come from being physically strong, like you would do okay in a physical conflict. So internally right now in the Conservatives, the consensus is that Pierre Poilievre needs to pivot. He needs to pivot to different kind of language. I don't think he can. I think that his whole thing is he knows he's the tough guy and he knows there's going to be a place for him eventually and he knows when it's his time and he'll know when it's not. This is how the theory goes. So I don't think it's likely that he's going to pivot or change his messaging. I think he's going to stay doing what he does and he's going to wait for people to come to him, and he probably knows that this moment has passed him by. I think at the leadership inquiry in January, I think that Pierre Poilievre is going to have a tough time. I don't know that he really can pivot because his strength has always been in being the tough guy. So I think that these two, Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau, I think they're an embodiment of this classical theory that goes back to our hunter-gatherer days as a psychological theory, why we would choose someone like Justin Trudeau and then suddenly his popularity would tank and we would choose someone like Pierre Poilievre.